إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, today we're going into the 27th of Jumad Al-Ula of the year 1438. It is Friday going into Saturday. We were scheduled to discuss onwards, moving closer to 1000 Hijri, but an event occurred that I felt was necessary to speak on. And it was this. On the 20th of Jumad Al-Ula, Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman died in the federal prison in the United States. And there's now a mad scramble of people, know-nothings for the most part, in discussing his life, and it's primarily been overshadowed because he has been referred to as the mastermind of the first World Trade Center attack of the Kafir calendar of 1993. The problem with that is, at the beginning, we just want to ask this question. How could someone blind with diabetes and high blood pressure set up a system in which he planned on kidnapping the Pope, destroying the Washington Monument, destroying the Capitol building, destroying the World Trade Center, having the Statue of Liberty burnt down, as well as attacking the Eiffel Tower? How could someone with childhood diabetes who was blind since he was 10 months old possibly carry out such a spectacular feat? And people believe it. The only option then is to go to the sources of this man's life and to discuss it. What I'm going to be talking about is going to be his scholarly life. Because if someone wants to look at the court transcripts of his case, that is very easy to do. And you will laugh, you will chuckle, you will shake your head ruefully, you will generally be disgusted at what you read. Because we have a man who died at 78 years of age in prison for crimes that he did not do. We have him going to prison after he had stated very clearly on a number of occasions that he pled his innocence, that he had always maintained his innocence, that he was not guilty of this. And the informants, particularly Ahmad Salam and others, would later acknowledge that there was no real meat to what it was that they were professing. But I want to take a scholarly look at him because besides all the other fluff, he is mainly remembered in Arabic for his scholarly. Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman is mainly mentioned for his scholarly leftover, for his scholarly legacy. So it's so weird to me that that's totally neglected and it's been allowed in English for this to sort of overshadow everything. So I figured we would speak about his life tonight in a bit of detail. So we start with the man himself. The Sheikh, his name is Umar, the son of Ahmed, the son of Ali, the son of Abdur-Rahman. He was born, according to some accounts, in 1357, according to some accounts 1360. But 1357 would most likely be the most correct, as it's what he himself maintained. He was born in Jamaliya, in the governorate of Dakhaliya in Middle Egypt. When he reached 10 months old, due to childhood diabetes, he was completely blind. By the time he was 10 months old, he was completely blind due to childhood diabetes. And just very quickly, childhood diabetes will come about because of either the child is very oversized and large for its size, or the mother's diet. It also can happen if you have a propensity towards diabetes because of certain issues of sugar, especially once white sugar was introduced into the north of Egypt in the 1940s. You have massive cases of childhood diabetes. White sugar being introduced, having a massive impact. Who has childhood diabetes at birth? You have to think about these things. So, he's blind at 10 months old. When he reached 5 years of age, his mother's brother, who was his favorite uncle, enrolled him at Mahadun Nur, the An-Nur Institute for the Disabled, at Tanta. Tanta is the same place. Tanta is known for producing people like Sheikh Mahmoud Khalil al-Husri, Abdul Basit Abdul Samad. They studied there. This is a major place. A lot of scholars came out of this dusty place, this dusty little town that they call it. So he went to Mahad al-Nur, a Nur Institute for the Disabled, the Tanta, when he was 5. He began his qira'ah of the Quran. In describing his own words in an interview that was placed in his book, Kalimat Haq, he said, "I was born to 2 destitute parents. And they said to me when I was young, you went blind at 10 months after your birth. But you must learn to strive." So in my early childhood, my maternal uncle would take me to the masjid in the morning and read the Quran to me. Until when I reached 5 years of age, he entered me into the Mahad. Mahadun Nur for the disabled, in order to learn the Quran as well as writing, and also to study the Braille language. This Mahad was in Tanta, and I took advantage of this in my early youth. By the time I'd reached 11 years of age, I'd memorized the Quran. So you need to understand what he's talking about then about his life. He's 11 years old. He's memorized the Quran. He's blind. And he has childhood diabetes, so he has to administer shots or have shots administered. He's 11 years old. He has all these other things against him. He has to learn another language in addition to the language he's already speaking, Arabic. He has to learn Braille. But you have to remember as well, though, the main books of fiqh and all these other things, they're not in Braille. So he had to learn to listen, sama', by listening. So he had to memorize by hearing. And so this is part of his genius. Now, he memorizes the Quran when he is 11 years of age. The qira'ah was Hafs and Asim, because in the north and to the middle portion of Egypt, Hafs and Asim, Maliki Yawmiddin, this qira'ah, that is what's mainly known by most of the people. The area where he's from, they are Shafi'is. So he started out studying the Shafi'i fiqh. In fact, the books that they study, it's called Al-Qira'a wal-Kitaba, reading and writing for the elimination of illiteracy and the growth of childhood knowledge. That's the full title of the book series they study. Okay, it's in the Kutab system. Those that are here that have done the introduction, you've done the introduction book. The same one that Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman did. All right, it works because it works. So the Shaykh went on after memorizing the Quran and attended the Mahad al-Mansura ad-Dini, the Institute at Al-Mansura for Religious Education. And he entered into Al-Azhar's secondary program in the year 1389. So he began entering into this institution that had 3,000 students. And he remained there for 5 years. The time that you're there for 5 years is for memorizing small texts, for completion of the memorizing, and understanding them. So Shaykh Umar himself says in his introduction, he says, we would review our lessons very well and go over the explanation of the commentaries and what was in the lessons from the teacher. And we would also go into books that were also not in the Azhar curriculum, to the point that we had a heavy grounding. And sometimes we would challenge the teachers and ask them questions that were challenging and sometimes disabled their intellects in order to get to the bottom of a question. Close quote. And understand this. This is between 11 and 15 years of age. He's going there with his maternal uncle. So his maternal uncle has entered him into this program. He's going there with his maternal uncle. They're disabling teachers because Al-Azhar, like other jami'at, it has set books in its curriculum that you go through. So you have these little metans that will be 8 pages, 10 pages, 15 pages. Here's your metan. You memorize this metan for your creed. Then when that's done, the next year you'll go through commentaries on it that will strengthen your knowledge and better you and give you information. They say, okay, this is your curriculum. He was doing that, but completing that and then saying, I'm going to read some outside literature. So he's reading outside literature. So he's now coming back into class with external literature, which the teacher might be saying, listen, we're not talking about that. We're only dealing with this literature. Because they have a set program of what they're trying to complete. Other students are like, I've never heard of those books. Because obviously they spent this time memorizing these little metans. So they haven't heard this information. So it caused a little bit of heat. Okay. Now, once a young Shaykh Umar does this, he then heads to the University of Usuluddin in Cairo. He heads to the University of Usuluddin in Cairo. And this would be in the year 1394. And he worked so hard that he wound up teaching some of the classes in the teacher's absence when it was required. He received al-Ijazatul Aliyah, which means a high-level ijazah, marked as Mumtaz, which means excellent, with a first level. And this was in the area, the subject of hadith and tafsir. Subject of hadith and tafsir. The closest equivalent in English, I suppose, would be a PhD. Now remember, Shaikh Umar is born 1357. Right? He completes 1394, or if we say 1398, okay, after all this learning. He's got a PhD in 1398. He was born 1357. So he completes this. Now, of his sheikhs, one of his sheikhs in hadith was a Shaykh Muhammad Abu Shahba. Muhammad Abu Shahba was himself blind. He was himself blind. Child of diabetes. He was himself blind. One of the major figures of Hanafi fiqh in this age, one of the few Hanafis who wasn't Mu'tazila. For a few Hanafis of this age, instead of Al-Azhar, wasn't Mu'tazila. Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman studied from him by sama', by hearing, Al-Bukhari and Muslim, and he memorized them both. Understand, Muslim, Bukhari is 7,400 hadith and more. Muslim, you're looking about 2,600. So he memorized this. Tafsir, he studied a number of texts. But what we'll do is we'll look at his layout from what he said that he did in fiqh, because he had teachers, Shaykh Muhammad Abu Shahba. Another was a Shaykh Abdul Azim Abbas, as well as the Shaykh Ahmed al-Sayyid Kumi, along with two other Sheikhs, Mustafa Bisa and Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Latif al-Subaki, who died 1388. Now let's look, because he's going to say himself what he went through, what books he went through. So let's talk about what books he went through. He says, in Shafi'i fiqh, because Al-Azhar is primarily heavily weighted towards the Shafi'i fiqh, that's what they are. In Shafi'i fiqh, I studied and memorized the Kitab Abu Shuja' and its commentaries. I studied Ibn al-Qasim in his An-Nihaya. This is again still Hanafi fiqh, still Shafi'i fiqh. Ibn Qasim in his An-Nihaya. Al-Iqna' and Al-Muhadhab by Shirazi. So these are the major texts. So now remember, he's blind. So he has to sit and he has to listen and he has to retain this information. And he's in his early 20s or somewhere around. And he's retaining this information. He's already entered into a program when he was in his single digit numbers kid. Entered into this gifted program. I suppose you'd call him a child prodigy. Right? So he completes those texts. He studied the Al-Majmu'ah, which is 23 volumes. He studied that. He sat with a Maliki teacher, which would be Shaykh Muhammad Habibullah al-Shanqiti. And he studied the Ashmawiyah. He studied that with him. Shaykh Muhammad Abu Shahba was actually Hanafi, as we said. So he studied with him Nur al-Idah. He studied that with him. For the Subkis, he studied with them Al-Umda and Al-Mughni. So now we're looking at comparative fiqh. So he's studying his madhab, but he's also doing comparative fiqh. He's in his early 20s. He's doing comparative fiqh. And Al-Mughni, comparative. He also has looked at other sects and other groups. So he's looked at Bidayatul Mujtahid by Ibn Rushd, Subul Salam by Al-Amir al-Sana'ani, which is sort of an external examination of Bulugh al-Maram, and Al-Muhalla by Ibn Hazm. And Ibn Hazm was Zahiri, and that's a dead madhab. So he's studying dead madhab. He's studying dead ones. And Nail al-Awtar by Al-Shawkani. Now, in Usul al-Fiqh, he studied the Mukhtasar of Ibn Hajim. He studied the Tahrir of Ibn al-Humam. He studied the Usul al-Fiqh text of Imam al-Haramain, and the classic in Usul al-Fiqh, Al-Mustasfa by Imam al-Ghazali. Mustasfa is extremely difficult. Alright, he sat with and looked at the texts of Shaykh Muhammad Abu Zahra. He studied that text, and also looked at the text of Shaykh Abdul Wahhab Khalaf, Usul al-Fiqh. He studied Jamal Jawami' by Imam al-Subki. He studied more texts by Ibn al-Humam. He studied the Usul al-Fiqh of Abu Bakr al-Jassas, which is a Hanafi scholar. He also wrote He also wrote a tafsir of Quran, the only Hanafi tafsir I know of, which is the tafsir Abu Bakr al-Jassas. That's the only tafsir of Ahkam al-Quran that I know of written by a Hanafi. He studied another Hanafi Usul Fiqh text, which is by Muhammad ibn Ali al-Basri, who was Mu'tazila, but he wrote this Usul Fiqh text. He studied the Usul of Fakhruddin al-Razi. He studied Al-Ahkam, Usul al-Ahkam by Al-Amidi, a big Hanbali judge. Al-Muwafaqat by Al-Shatibi. Al-Tamheed by an Isnawi, as well as studying by Abdul Shakur al-Hindi, his text. So we had a very, very detailed study. And hadith, we're talking about memorization or have read through with the Shaykh. He read through Fath al-Bari, which is the commentary of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali on al-Bukhari's text. He went through that. He studied al-Qastalani. Al-Qastalani is another Shaykh who did a commentary on al-Bukhari, big Shafi'i scholar. And he also did the Sharh of Imam al-Nawawi on the Sahih of Imam Muslim. So this is already, we're looking at, I mean, if you look at this, you're looking at Fath al-Bari. If we look at one print house, it's got 21 volumes. Then Qastalani is another 10, so that's 31. Then we've got 18. So we're looking at, he's gone through 49 volumes of information on Al-Bukhari and Muslim alone. We haven't even talked about the rest of it. He's gone through Al-Jami' al-Saghir by Imam al-Suyuti and the commentary on it, which is Al-Jami' al-Saghir is 8,000 hadith. The commentary is by Abdur-Rahman al-Munawi. He went through this. He also looked at the dispute of his days, because one of the big disputes in his time is a man by the name Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani was going through and reclassifying a hadith that were authentic as da'if and a hadith that were da'if as authentic. And it was causing a big tribulation because this man had caused a problem. He was a watchmaker by profession. He was the son of a Hanafi teacher of fiqh, Nuh al-Albani. So Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani, he'd come to Damascus. He was a watchmaker, and he would spend time at the Maktabat al-Zahiriyah, and he would read through the books, and he'd come to his own conclusions on them in hadith books. This is without having memorized the Quran, without any of the prerequisites. But because he was able to print these books and get them out there, it would cause these tribulations. So Shaykh Umar would read these things to understand more and listen to understand more of what's happening in the world. And a hadith, the Mustalah al-Hadith, hadith terminology, he read At-Taqrib by Imam al-Nawawi, as well as Ulum al-Hadith by Muhammad al-Samahi. In Tafsir, he read Imam al-Tabari. He read with the Shaykh Imam al-Tabari's full commentary. Again, this is 30 volumes. This is Jami' al-Bayan with Ta'wil. This is 30 volumes in one printing. Right? Al-Kashaf, he went through to understand the arguments the Mu'tazila might use. Right? That's by Zamakhshari. Al-Baydawi's Tafsir, Abu Sa'ud's Tafsir, An-Nasafi's Tafsir, Al-Khazin's Tafsir, Al-Futuhat al-Ilahiyya. He read this Tafsir. The Tafsir of Jalalain, as well as the commentary by Imam al-Sawi. Miftah al-Ghayb by Imam al-Razi, which is huge. Dar al-Manthur by Imam al-Suyuti. Ruh al-Ma'ani by al-Alusi. Imam Mahmud al-Alusi's commentary, Ruh al-Ma'ani, is one of the great Hanafi scholars of, say, I think it's the 20th Kafir century. So he's a major figure. He died not that long ago. Imam al-Qurtubi's Tafsir. He studied this. Al-Mas'udi's Tafsir. He also studied other things that were going on at the time, like he examined Sayyid Qutb's attempt of explaining the Quran and Mawdudis to understand what was happening in the tafsir market and why people were being transformed. Because during this time in his youth, there were major events that were going on that were shaping the world. First, in Egypt, the monarchy had fallen by the time he reached his 20s, so the monarchy was finished. Abdur-Razzaq as-Sanhuri, who's responsible for the drafting of the secular French Roman-based constitutions of Egypt, Libya, Jordan, Palestine, Syria. He's responsible for all these things, this Egyptian man. He started in Egypt. And so there was a lot of chaos, and there were attempts to kill Sanhuri. There were numerous attempts to kill him because people were enraged because they knew he was tampering with the revealed law. These are some of the things that were going on in Shaykh Umar's time. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin had appeared in Shaykh Umar's time. Now, this is a very important time because the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, they represent a period known as the Fikrah period. Fikrah means like a trend or an idea. And the Fikrah of that time that Ikhwan al-Muslimin brought was known as Fikrah al-Tajdidiyya, the renewal, the Fikrah of renewal. This trend of renewal that we need to renew Islam again. And one of the most popular texts, the first one was by the Murshid of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which was by Hassan al-Banna, which is this collection of his Majmu' al-Rasail on different topics, which contains pretty much every book that was ever done by Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna is the son of Sheikh Ahmed al-Sa'ati. Sheikh Ahmed al-Sa'ati was one of the greatest hadith scholars of the past age. Sheikh Ahmed al-Sa'ati is only one of two sheikhs that wrote an entire commentary on the Musnad of Imam Ahmed. There's only two commentaries on the Musnad. Musnad is 30,000 hadith. Only two people written a commentary on it. One is Imam al-Safarini, rahimahullah, and another one is him, Imam Ahmed al-Sa'ati. He had 4 sons and 4 daughters. And he said, each one of my 4 sons is going to follow one of the 4 for the barakah of it. 4 daughters, same thing. So his son, Hassan al-Banna, Hassan was the one chosen to be Hanafi. So he was sent into a Hanafi madrasa to study with them, and he learned the Hanafi fiqh. Now, by and large, if you look at Hassan al-Banna, his text that he wrote is primarily centered on social interaction and changes, and changing people's social condition, and customs that came in that had nothing to do with Islam, and answering colonialism. But Sayyid Qutb would come not long after, close to the same time, and he wrote 2 very influential books. Ma'alif al-Tariq, which is the signposts in the road or road signs, and those books led to a new fikrah. And Fi Dhilal al-Quran, which took things to a different level. Ma'alim fi Tariq first started by Sayyid Qutb saying that the world has gone back into Jahiliyyah. The world's gone back into Jahiliyyah. And all the rulers of the Muslim world don't understand what's happened because this Jahiliyyah has occurred and it's spread to people. He first started formulating these ideas after his return from a school trip from the United States, which was funded by the then Egyptian government to make teachers to reform their education system so it will be along the standard of American and European standards. So he went to the United States and studied their education system and their culture. And his job was to bring it back and to try to implement it. But it actually twisted him because he was deeply disturbed by it. Well, he would be tortured several times in prison, in particular Limantura. And it was while in Limantura that he wrote Fi Dhilal al-Quran, in the shade of the Quran, in which he went one step further and said, it's not just the people in Jahiliyyah, the kuffar, that have brought this, but the rulers of these places, particularly Egypt, they're kuffar as well. They're in Jahiliyyah. They're kuffar. And the people that help them, they're also kuffar. He said, we won't be able to fully stop them. There'll be a group called the Sabiqun, which will raise up and reestablish the Ummah, because his position in Ma'alim fi Tariq was that the Ummah's disappeared. There is no Ummah. They've dissolved like salt and water. The Ummah must be revived. And this was a big fikra that was going on during this time. So Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman is alive during this time, and he's reading this literature and trying to make sense of it, and why are there so many people joining Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Okay. Now, in Ulum al-Quran, he studied the Zarkashi, Al-Itqan by As-Suyuti, and Az-Zurqani. In Creed, he memorized Imam Tahawi's text. He learned the Wasitiyah of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, the Metin. He also studied it's known as Kitab al-Iman by Taqi ibn Taymiyyah. And then he also did a specialization course in comparative creed, where he studied the 72, with particular emphasis on the Mu'tazila, the Shia, the Murji'ah, the Jabariyah, the Khawarij, and he also studied the Ash'ari books and examined them in great detail as well. He memorized a number of texts, as we mentioned. He memorized an Arabic grammar text. He memorized the Ajrumiyah and also the Alfiyah of Malik. He memorized the Ghaya and Taqrib and Fiqh. He memorized, as we said, Bukhari and Muslim. He memorized books on grammar and prosody, books in fiqh. He memorized books in adab and customs. He memorized books on sunan du'as. He memorized books of wird. Most of the people that attend Al-Azhar would classify themselves as khalwati in terms of the tariqah. Shaykh Umar didn't really have a tariqah per se. He probably learned the khalwati tariqah, but he didn't have one per se. Not per se. And then one of the things he said about himself was, he said, quote, I learned from an early age not to waste my time. So I didn't waste my time and use up my valuable gifted talents, but instead I used them for Allah. And because of this, Allah gave me much success. Close quote. So he was using his time wisely. I have to use my time wisely. Using time wisely. Right? So now to return back to his scholarly life, after understanding more about him now, he becomes the Imam and Khatib for the endowments department. And this is during the year 1395 to 1396. So his job is to help and assist people while they're there. To teach to them, to preach them, to teach them the fiqh and all these other things. While he was there, he took another, what we would call a PhD. So this is the number 2 one. He took another PhD. This one was in tafsir. And right after that, he started teaching tafsir. He continued on. And then later on, he took another PhD. This time in the study of the sacred months of the calendar. This was in 1397, 1398. This was the study of the Muslim calendars, because after his remarks, when the military government in Egypt came to power, they tried to outlaw people, in some cases under pain of death, for going to sight the moon and going to look for the moon, because it means that they're separate from the government. Because if you're going and sighting the moon, that means you don't accept the civil calendar when the government's telling you when Ramadan is, when the government's telling you when this. So because of that, people are getting in trouble. So he wrote a book that dealt with the sacred months and why they should still be continuing, why the Hijri calendar is still in existence. He fought hard to try to make sure that the Hijri calendar stayed. And they were successful, to where it appeared right alongside of the pagan calendar on the newspaper on front editorial pages. He became an assistant at the University of Usuluddin the year after. He was the chief teacher at a masjid in Fayoum and taught people fiqh, grammar, creed, and a number of other things. He also, without seeking a wage, did volunteer work at Al-Azhar and helped the poor, and also assisted at numerous shelters and other places. Remember, he's blind. He's disabled. You'd think, why is he helping at a shelter? Shouldn't he be getting zakat al-fitr? Shouldn't he be? He was in the business of assisting the indigent and the weak. That was his business. Now, around the year 1399, he wound up going to jail. He wound up going to jail because when he completed his first major graduation, remember he's got 4 PhDs and he's graduating, the funeral of Gamal Abdel Nasser is being held, which I think on the Catholic calendar is 28th of September 1970. Well, it's not important, is it? But nonetheless, the funeral was being held. And when he was asked why he's not going and where he's going, Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman passes his first ruling and says, well, because if someone dies as a murtad, as an apostate, then you don't pray on a kafir that dies an apostate without repenting. And Gamal Abdel Nasser was a kafir. That's his first fatwa upon graduation. He's in jail the day after. He's in jail. That was his first fatwa, having left the faculty department. So now he's in jail. Now, this caused tremendous problems because the sheikh was respected by the people. And a lot of people had a lot of respect for the sheikh. But they couldn't understand why there was this conflict between him and the scholars that were with him and those that said, we're going to go ahead and pray on him nonetheless. He didn't understand. Some people couldn't understand the conflict because there was a lot of chaos during this time. Now, during this time, there was what was known as the Fikratul Qutubiyya, the Sayyid Qutb Fikra. Now, he had been executed by hanging by Gamal Abdel Nasser 4 years before that. But his fikra, his ideas, continued to permeate the society. A book, when signposts had first been written, it was refuted immediately by the great Marja, Imam Muhammad Abdul Latif as-Subki, who died in 1388. It was immediately refuted. But the ideas stayed around. And that idea led on to another idea, which is known as Fikratul Takfir wal Hijra, which is the trend of takfir and hijrah. And these are people that Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman, while in jail and also on the street, would have to deal with. The most important figure during this time was a man named Shukri Ahmed Mustafa Abdul Al. He was from South Egypt, and he is really the wellspring of this thinking. He digested Fi Dhilal al-Quran, he digested Ma'alim fi Tariq, and his position was all of Egypt is kafir. All of it. The people are, the establishment, the government, all the scholars, they are mushrikeen and kuffar. And they're not even apostate kafirs, they're kuffar asliyin, which means that they're original kuffar, that they were never Muslim. Which is something it went even further than some of Sayyid Qutb's writings, and we say that in quotes. So now Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman had to deal with them in prison because they were locked up in prison for different issues and different problems. Jama'at al-Takfir wal Hijra forms, but they actually call themselves Jama'at al-Muslimin. And Shukri Mustafa Abdul Al is on a very vigorous writing campaign. He writes a 3,000-page book called Al-Ijtihad, which he says has abrogated taqleed. So anyone following madhabs now is a mushrik, because he's clearly stated that everyone's responsible for being a mujtahid. So Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, he has to deal with Shukr Mustafa Abdul Al, his younger sibling, Mahir Abdul Aziz, Alauddin Ali Rida, and Ali Ismail. He has to deal with all these different figures. Well, he gets out, nonetheless. And when he gets out, he even gives his cell number. He says that he was in prison number 8. He was there for 8 months, and he was in jail cell number 24. So he actually remembers where he was. This is a blind man that's remembering these details. He was then moved to be a teacher at an institute in Al-Fayoum, the religious institute, but then got in trouble there when he was asked and repeated the same statement he made, so he got moved to Minya. He got moved to Minya in 1399 to 1401. He's moved to Minya. Now, while there, he gets another PhD. This one is in Usuluddin and Tafsir. He continues on another 2 to 3 years and gets another PhD. This one's in Hadith. I think we're at 5 now. So 6 maybe, 5, 6. So now he's got 5, 6 PhDs. So reason why we're going through this is I'm showing you this is not an ignorant man. This is not a buffoon. He's not some type of crazy person. This is not an ignorant man. He's an intelligent man. And what we're seeing in the news is sort of reduced exactly who this man is. So we need to reconfigure and recalibrate our understanding of matters. But we'll continue. Now he becomes a professor in guidance to Islam, evaluation and preaching at the University of Usuluddin in Asyut in South Egypt. And this is 1402, 1403. But then he switched to the Department of Tafsir 2 years later because they need help. And there aren't enough professors to teach Tafsir. Shaykh Omar in his life taught Tafsir for 15 years in his life. Took us 5 to get through one book. He taught Tafsir for 15 years. Right? Well, there was no one in Arabia other than Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti teaching Tafsir in Arabia. So they asked Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman to go over. So Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, he heads over there. But while he's over there, Arabia receives a rude awakening. Because Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman exposes them to what is known as the Fikratul Tahkim, the trend of judgment of today's rulers. His position, now you have Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, you have Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, you have Abdul Qadir Awdah, you have Ahmed Shakir, and a few other scholars. Their position is that all the leaders in the 48 majority Muslim countries, they're all kuffar. And any scholars that help them are either spies or enablers. So he gets there and he's teaching tafsir. And he comes to ayat, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah, ayat 44, 45, 47. Those who don't judge by Allah, they're unbelievers, oppressors, rebellious sinners. It says, this applies to your government and every other government in the Muslim world. And he mentions the king's name and says he's a kafir. He says, don't pray for him. Well, obviously you don't spend long in tafsir teaching this way. He goes further. He says that they're guilty of the great sin of shirk. By this time, he's written his book, Tafsir Ayatul Hakimiyya. Now, this is extremely important. This time is known as Fikratul Hakimiyya, this particular period. I'd say you'd probably say that's the 70s, late 70s. This time it's called Fikratul Hakimiyya, the Hakimiyya trend. The expression Hakimiyya was initially used by Sayyid Qutb to refer to Allah's judgment in legislating laws. Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, although disagreeing with Sayyid Qutb, said the actual word is correct, that only Allah has the right to make laws and legislate. Only He does. Now, previous to that time, when people would use theological language, originally Tawheed was one. That's all there was. Allah is the Lord, is one. But Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, who lived from 661 to 728 Hijri, he said there's three Tawheed. There's the Tawheed of Allah's Lordship, which originally was, that's the only Tawheed we discussed, because we said Tawheed was one. But Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah said no. There are three Tawheeds. There are three. There is the Tawheed of Allah's Lordship. There's one Creator, one Designer, one Sustainer. It's Allah. It's Tawheed of Lordship. Tawheed ul-Uluhiyya, or Tawheed al-Ibadah. Only Allah has the right to be worshipped. This is not from the first three generations. I'm just letting you know this. This is from Ilm al-Kalam. This is speculative theology. It's not from the Deen, in to be particular. But nonetheless, we'll quote it. So, Tawheed al-Uluhiyya, Tawheed al-Ibadah. Number 3, Tawheed al-Asma'i was-Sifat, the Tawheed of Allah's names and attributes. And he said that these Tawheeds, one must have all three of these. Right? One must have all three of these. Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, in his text, Ayatul Hakimiyya, which I think has only been printed once. I didn't bring my copy. He says, no, there are 4 Tawheeds. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, Tawheed al-Asma'i wa Sifat, and Tawheed al-Hakimiyya. Prior to this time, remember the Saudi establishment, they're like, what in the world? Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, what? Yes, there are 4 Tawheed. And your rulers, all the rulers in these lands, these majority, are guilty of Shirk al-Hakimiyya, the Shirk in Allah's Hakimiyya. Because they don't have any Tawheed al-Hakimiyya. Because if they did, they'd be judging and legislating what Allah sent down. Therefore, they are mushrikeen. Well, he's forced out of Arabia. He's forced out. He's forced out. Not before being on a radio broadcast, which is extremely rare. If you dig, you could probably find it. As he's sitting in the chair and he's got the headphones on and he's being interviewed. And they said, well, respected Sheikh, how can you say such a thing where Arabia is filled with masjids and everything else? And his immediate response wasn't a Masjid al-Haram in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was filled with shirk at this time. He says, you're no different. And your leaders are mushriks, associating partners with Allah. Now, Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti came to his aid and said, that's true. They are mushriks, associating partners with Allah. Before that time, there'd been a book written that Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman had most likely read, known as Tahkim al-Qawaneen, which discusses the major shirk of legislating laws and ruling by what Allah sent down by Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, who died 1389. Before that time, there was another text that Shaykh Umar would have had access to, which is Hukm al-Jahiliyyah, which is by Ahmed Shakir. He died 1377. These pieces of literature, they had a great shaping of his mind. Great shaping of his mind. But no one had ever actually said there's a 4th Tawheed called Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, and he was the first one to do this. So he gets back to Egypt, and this fikra of Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, it just takes off all over the place. It wouldn't come into English until around the time of 93, 94. People started talking about Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, and if you didn't know it, you were mushrik. But in Arabic, it was in the 70s, Tawheed al-Hakimiyya. So the Sheikh gets back from Arabia, and this was after 3 years. He returns to Egypt. He's teaching at the Usuluddin Institute in Asyut. He spends some time there as a khatib and a preacher, teaching people the deen, an advisor of sincere conduct, teaching people hifz, teaching students fiqh. But because he referred to the leaders as mushrikeen, in the year 1405, he had to go into hiding because that is the same year that Muhammad Anwar Ahmed al-Sadat was gunned down and killed by Khalid Islambuli, the brother of Muhammad Islambuli, because of the fact that they said, well, because Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman made takfir on all the rulers, someone took him up on the offer and killed Sadat, and he is responsible for this. So he went into hiding because he said, I never told anyone to kill Sadat. I said that there are mushrikeen associating partners with Allah and they need to repent and such. But he never actually told anyone to go kill. Well, eventually, after some time, they caught him. And they brought him to court on 10 charges. All of which, this is a military court in Egypt. If you look at the footage of the trial, he's sitting inside of a cage. It looks like a bird cage. He's sitting inside of a massive cage. And he's just sitting, and he's doesn't know fully what's going on other than verbally. He doesn't know that he's inside of a cage and that people are looking at him and that there's pictures being taken of him all. He doesn't understand any of this because he can only hear. The two main charges against him are that he told someone to kill Muhammad Ahmed Anwar al-Sadat. You told someone to go kill this man. And because of what you told him to do, Khalid al-Islambuli wound up going and killing Muhammad Ahmed Anwar al-Sadat. You said, go kill Sadat. He said, I never knew this man on that level. People come and pray with me. They spend time with me. I never gave a ruling to kill the man. I give the ruling regarding what the shirk is. But I've never said, go kill this particular man. So he wound up going to court for this and a number of other charges. There were 10 counts against him. They also said that he is the leader of Al-Jama'at al-Islamiyya, which most people in Arabic know as Al-Jama'ah, which is a group that was founded in the 1980s, which continued this long civil war against the Egyptian government. That he was responsible for fatwa for the Jama'ah, which he strenuously denied. He says, I'm the people's mufti. People come to me, they ask me for fatwa, I give them. I'm not the Jama'ah's mufti. I'm just the mufti of people. People come, they ask me questions, I will answer. That's all I am. I'm nothing more, nothing less than that. To many people's shock and surprise, 4 years later, he was found innocent and released. Which people were shocked. He was found innocent and released. He then leaves Egypt from Limantora prison. He went to Sudan. And when they found out about his ideas down there, they said, well, what about the leaders down there? He said, I told you before, it's all the rulers of the majority Muslim countries. Sudan is no different. It became kafir when it broke off and became Kharij against Egypt. So he's kicked out. Wound up in Somalia, then Eritrea. And then finally, he comes to the United Kingdom. And when he comes to the United Kingdom, he reiterates the statement and then also attacks a lot of the Arab community leaders in the United Kingdom for their support of the Gulf War because of the killing. And he goes on to make takfir on Bin Baz and the Saudi establishment, and he really took things to a different place. And people were shocked here because they weren't expecting that. He then moves to the United States on the West Coast. I'd probably seen him at the masjid twice in passing on the West Coast. I was just coming out of whatever I was in. So I'd only seen him in passing, but he was responsible for setting up Zakat al-Fitr distribution in our area. He did a lot for orphans. You stop seeing a lot of street children. You stop seeing prostitutes. And I used to wonder, well, have they been driven away? It's like, no. They're being fed. They're not on the street. They're being fed. So that's one thing I can say for a surety about Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman. He later moved to the East Coast and was mainly the teacher at Masjid Muhammad in New York City, as well as Masjid al-Tawheed in Jersey City. There were 3 masjids that he would teach at. He recorded the better part of some 500 lectures, most of which I've heard. Again, covering tafsir. Taught people Quran, worked on people's tajweed, and continued as he was. I'm just going to go through some of his written books. All right. The books that he wrote, Tafsir Surat al-Najm. He wrote a commentary on Surat al-Najm, which he discussed. That's been printed. Tafsir Surat al-Qamar, which I both read it. I think his recordings, because I've read his recording of Tafsir Surat al-Qamar and Tafsir Surat al-Ma'arij. I think, personally myself, his spoken lectures are far more powerful than his written, because his written he's dictating to someone in the writing form. I think his spoken is way more powerful because his voice and his inflection and everything else. Tafsir Surat al-Rahman, which that was actually dictated while he's been in Liman Torah prison. Kalimat Haq, which was a series of exchanges between him and the judge in the Egyptian court, where he's actually telling the judge, you're committing kufr by sitting in the chair wearing the robes that you're wearing because you're representing other than what Allah sent down. You are tantamount to representing another god. So he said, I shouldn't be addressing you because you belong to another religion. So it was that book, Kalimat Haq, is it's been reprinted twice. It's very difficult to get now. Text Tafsir Ayat al-Hakimiyya. Again, that's where he mentions Tawheed al-Hakimiyya. That's been printed once. Al-Ashhur al-Haram, the sacred months. Again, good printed text. Mawqif al-Quran min khusumah. The discussion regarding the Quran, its proper recitation, and the Tafsir Surah al-Tawbah, which is very lengthy. Asnaf al-Hukam, his book, The Classification of Rulers, which he lays out his justification of all the rulers of the majority Muslim countries being kuffar. He lays out his understanding of why that's the case. I have that text. It was printed like once and then like went underground. You couldn't find it again. It's 191 pages. Very thorough text. But again, he's coming from that very strong background. Now, the final point about his career is he belongs to a period that I suppose that would be the 80s of the Kafir calendar, which is the Al-Fikratul Jihadiyya, the Jihad Fikra. The Jihad Fikra. During Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman's tenure during this time, he was very much an advocate of the Jihad Fikra. The Jihad Fikra was a coalescing of several different peoples. He's the founder of the Jihad Fikra. He's not. He's one of like the loudest voices. But the Jihad Fikra was a whole bunch of different heads. The Jihad Fikra was flowered and cultivated because of the war in Afghanistan. The Jihad Fikr had been around since the 1960s of the Kafir age, but was cultivated by the Afghan conflict, where it was seen that jihad is needed. The Jihad Fikra, it's needed, it should be expressed, it should be given. We must go and make jihad. And not only to defeat the Russians. Once the Russians were defeated, then there was a discussion of what do we do now when we go back? What should we do when we head home? So one of the other heads of the Jihad Fikra, Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf Azam, he died 1410 Hijri, rahimahullah. His text, he started off by writing a text on creed, and this little book here, Al-Aqidah wa Athruha fi Bana al-Jail, this text, I think it's one of the earlier copies. It's from 1980. It's the third printing. The original printing was from like 1979, this text. But this is what a lot of what we call the Arab Afghan, the Arabs that were going to Afghanistan for war and such, this is what they learned. Their creed book, their textbook, their fiqh book, and also a section on Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, because there's a picture of him and Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman together, like holding arms in Afghanistan. So they knew each other. There's one lecture that they did together. And they differed over the Palestine issue because Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf Azam at one point had said there's no jihad in Palestine because it's nationalistic. Whereas Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman said, no, that's not the case. Right? And they fleshed it out. I'm not sure whatever happened to that discussion, but they fleshed it out. The other one was on answering Israel's hegemony in the area. They had a series of discussions on that. Then you found, after the assassination of Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf Azam, Sheikh Omar's voice became a lot louder in terms of what should be done regarding when the Afghan veterans, the Arab Afghans, go home. Because now it's like, okay, we're going home now to the Arab world. Do we use what we learned against the Russians on our own Arab rulers and our own people? To which Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf Azam's response was no. Because these are Muslim countries and such, and we mustn't do this. Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman's attitude was different. He said, no, those people are mushrikeen, they're guilty of shirk al-hakimiyya. And so they should be fought. The people, not the people, but the rulers, yes, because they have shirk al-hakimiyya in them. And he took there was a shift as well. His understanding was now that the Tatars, the new Tatars, as Ahmed Shakir and others said, are the Americans. He said, it's not them. The new Tatars are actually the in-house born leaders of the Muslim world. It's actually them. They're like the new Tatars, theologically. They're mushrikeen, right? So a totally different understanding, especially if you read his writings and his speeches and his discussions. There's a much greater sense of urgency with fighting the rulers in the Muslim countries than actually fighting external. Like for example, he didn't do a lot of discussion about fighting America or fighting England or whatever unless they were in those Arab countries. His attitude was very much centered around that you should attack the Arab leaders. In one of his lectures, he said their thrones must be destroyed and annihilated. Right. And it's just like, really powerful stuff. For him, politics and religion weren't, oh, well, one's politics, one's religion. No, they were mutually indistinguishable. They're part of the same thing. Right. So I'm telling you, the fiqh that he belonged to, the two fiqh periods that he belonged to, I'm not giving yay or nay. My job was to present him as a full figure, as who he was. Right. It's not my job to say, you will not this. Your job is to make it clear. Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman was a high-level shaykh, very knowledgeable, but he was not marja. And our obligation is to follow the maraji'. So what I'm presenting to you is a shaykh or alim from among the ulama to look at, to understand his case, and to not allow outside press or whatever else to shape your mind on the full life of a man. To give a full reading of the man's life. Okay. In closing then, I want to just mention a little bit more about the Sheikh's life in the United States, and then more about his PhD, because he wound up with 11 by the time it was said and done. So, Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, after heading to the United States and settling on the East Coast, ultimately, has a government informant sent to him to try to tease responses or provocations out of him against the United States, which there's no reference in any of his lectures of the 500. There's no reference to attacking the United States or any targets or what have you. But he tries to tease these responses out of him. Says that he's planning things. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. A half Pakistani, half Egyptian, Ramzi Yusuf, is set to go and plan an attack, and says that he felt inspired by Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman's lectures. Right. So there's all these things going on. But there's nothing where he openly says, go and kill. In fact, all the attacks and things that he's mentioning are all referring to Arab leaders. A particularly poignant area is when he was initially accused before his arrest, he did a hour-long interview on CNN with his translator and explained what happened, his point. It's very grainy. It's still on YouTube. It's very grainy, but you can actually hear his responses. And his arguments and his responses, he constantly brought up the Arab world, the Muslim world. There was no reference to the United States other than its foreign policy. And when he was asked about this position about, well, what about people attacking the United States? He's also responsible for another fatwa. This is called the Fatwa of Yemen. Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman said that the moment someone has a passport and they enter into the United States, they've entered into an emin, a transaction of emin, a non-verbal transaction of emin. He's the one, that's his ijtihad. He's the first one that said this. So he said, so therefore, one could never make an attack against the United States because they've entered into a contract, a transaction of emin, once they've entered the United States or anywhere else. Or if they've contracted and received a U.S. passport, the moment they've received that transaction has been made, right? He's the first one to introduce this doctrine of emin. He also had to deal with, because of the belief in Shirk al-Hakimiyya and Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, he had to deal with issues like, what about people in the parliament? What about the parliamentarians? What about the people entering into the... And Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman, his discussion was to say, well then, those who make laws are guilty of Shirk al-Hakimiyya. They're blatantly guilty of Shirk al-Hakimiyya. Those who protect those who make laws are guilty of Shirk al-Hakimiyya. So he said people who protect banks that openly are trading in riba, armies that protect brothels and things like this, they're guilty of Shirk al-Hakimiyya because it's other one Allah sent down. He says, but if someone entered into the parliament to block kufri legislation or someone legislating by just using a vote to block it, he says that would be permitted under the principle of durura because someone's actually trying to block it. Right. And he had actually contemplated doing this. I think this was 1980. He contemplated saying, okay, what if I, with my knowledge, with what I know, if I just enter the parliament, then I'll just block legislation. Every time I'll just block it. I'll just try to block it. That's what I'm going to do. Because that was his attitude, because he wanted to block the Egyptian civil code legislation, which was mainly Napoleonic and Roman law. Well, when he was arrested, he was taken into court and he was found guilty of these trumped-up charges which neither Ahmad al-Salam or others could prove through sworn cassette tape testimony and other things like this. When the guilty verdict was passed down, they made the grievous mistake of asking him if he has a final statement he would like to make. And Muslim brothers that I know were able to get me the 90-minute response of Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman to being found guilty. It's a 90-minute response. And that was slipped to me, and I thought about saying, well, I said to the brothers, should I translate it? Because I thought this would be really good for translational sake, so you get a fuller understanding of who he is, so everyone else gets to see not just the U.S., what the U.S. is saying. He said, oh no, that's already been done. So it's been translated. I think it's in a book form as well. So it's been done. Right? So that was really the last of it. Now, he gets transferred from place to place to place to place to place. He was in Minnesota, extreme cold temperature, deprived of medication, deprived of this, deprived of that. He's got 2 wives. He has 2 wives and 8 children. And of these children, they are Muhammad, Ahmed, Abdullah, Fatima, Abdur-Rahman, Usama, Al-Hassan, and Ammar. These are all of his children. So these are children. They're all hufal. They've all memorized the Quran. All completed it. And when he died on the 20th of Jumad ul-Ula, 1438, there were issues of repatriation of his body. They say that he died of natural causes stemming from his childhood diabetes and high blood pressure and all these other things. What finally got him put into solitary confinement, which he would later die for, is there was the local chaplain that would come in and recite Quran and do these other things, and he used to constantly correct the qira'ah of him. He wasn't allowed to attend the actual Jumas and other things, but his cell door would be facing there, and he'd hear his qira'ah and he'd correct it. He'd just correct his qira'ah, because there's mistakes in it, which is not the first time something like this has been said, but this is what he did. He'd correct people's qira'ah. If they were saying they were quoting a hadith wrong or running it together, he would correct the hadith loudly and say, no, it's not collected here, it's collected here. And this is what he did. So this was his life. Now, the point of saying all this was to say that we want to give a full picture of him. So Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman rahimahullah was one of the major figures of this age today. And his contribution to the discussion on what's going on in the Muslim world regarding the jihad fikrah, the hakimiyya fikrah, the takfir and hijrah fikrah, his contributions are immense and valuable and useful. And he's important in terms of understanding the direction that things are headed in. Because he said in a number of lectures before he died that a time will come where people will undermine the principle of jihad to the point to where Muslims will think that it's not the age for jihad, it's the best time to leave jihad now. Jihad is, he says, they'll say jihad is education, jihad is computers. He says when that happens, that's when they'll close in and really attack. He said, because now you'll leave self-defense. He says this is the same as the rape saying, I will no longer learn self-defense. There hasn't been a rape in this house ever. And when the rapist then gains access to the fortress, she'll not be able to defend herself because she's left learning self-defense. And he says it's a blameworthy thing to no longer study the martial arts. Like he really invested in people, to study the martial arts. And by martial arts, we don't just mean kung fu and tai chi. Martial arts includes swordsmanship. It includes bowmanship. It includes iron smelting for making swords. These are all arts and sciences and things that are a part of being Muslim. These things are being left. Horseback riding, camel riding. These things are being left. He says this is sinful because he says whatever is the means to something wajib, that thing becomes wajib. And whatever could be the means for something impermissible happening, that thing becomes impermissible. He says, so leaving horsemanship and animal husbandry is like, that's it, that's impermissible because it could lead to abandoning things like self-sufficiency regarding your food. So someone controls your food supply. That's one of the things he always says. You should never let someone control your food supply. Or your religion, where they control your days and they declare your months and all these other things. He was an outspoken critic on people announcing Ramadan. He said, no, the moon is seen. You don't announce anything. You see it. Right. So I just wanted to give that as a presentation about his life, to give a fuller picture of Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman, rahimahullah, the Azhari Shaykh, to give a presentation, the picture of him, whether people disagree with him or not, is not really the point. The point was that he's given a fair presentation and presented to the public in a clear and unbiased way so that people can actually understand who he was. So with that I say, أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم. Is there a question over what we've covered today? Like I said, I know it was outside of the Signs of the New Time class, but certain things happened, like with the murder of Shaykh al-Buti rahimahullah and the destruction of Imam Nawawi's grave, and just, certain things that are just disgusting, that you can't ignore it. And it would be irresponsible of me to ignore certain things. So just as an American who was alive during 2001, if he gave lectures and carried on as normal on the 11th September 2001 on Tuesday morning as if nothing had happened, he'd be irresponsible and derelict of his duty. Well, I'd be derelict of my duty with the situation of Shaykh Umar Abdur-Rahman rahimahullah dying and me not saying anything about the footprint that he's left behind that we can examine. So Questions? Yes.
A very well-educated man. What I'd like to know is, when you say he read a book, he completed a text, he did this, if you can sort of just highlight, the sort of the way we learn, for example, the method of learning according to sort of his method or the Islamic method, for somebody to walk away, and just to sort of build on that.
So the question was about Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman, the mentioning of him learning a book, this process of learning, how people took knowledge away, so that people who are in this gathering might be able to be inspired by that and take it away and understand what that means. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. The three methods, because Shaikh Umar Abdur-Rahman, rahimahullah, he came from the Kutab system. And there are three methods for the Kutab system. One is rote memorization. That's 70% of your learning is rote memorization. Reviewing, rote. The second, so whether you know what it means or not, initially your job is to get it down. They say, oh, how could that be done? Okay, when my son and anyone else's son is 4 years old, when he's learning the 8 times tables, does he know why 8 times 2 is 16? No. But he's got to get it down, because when he gets older, he'll understand those permutations and how they work when he uses them in other math contexts. The second is understanding of what it is that you are reciting, understanding what that is. And then number 3 is khabar and sanad. Khabar and sanad is where you read back to the sheikh what you've memorized and also what you've understood from that. And then the sheikh will grade what you've understood, correct mistakes. Oh, no, they'll correct that, flush out things that don't belong. And then when you have completed that particular area, the sheikh gives you permission to teach the book you've learned, the knowledge that he's given you, and then add on top of it with your own knowledge that you've also taken. So when you walk away with a book, now imagine that being done with 10 books within a subject, and the sheikh says, okay, listen, you can now teach the subject of tafsir. Having walked away, not just with 1 book, but 5 books or 6 books, you can now teach it, and in turn, build on the other tafsirs with additional points of tafsir that you have fleshed out. Right? So that is the method. So your rote memorization, understanding, khabar and sanad, because the sanad is what the sheikh is going to give you. This is where it's come from all the way back to the author of the book. The khabar is the news from the sheikh that's been taken, that's been built on, and then what you've built on top of that. Because you'll notice things in the text. Oh, subhanAllah, you'll notice things. And the sheikh counts on you to do that. That's why he doesn't give you everything. So that you see things, so that you notice things, so that you use your mind, so that you understand things. And then when you take away additional information, then when you teach your student, you're doing what? You're teaching him what the author of the book said, what the book has mentioned, what the commentaries mentioned, what the sheikh said. Now, in addition to this, but it's all being taught as a contiguous whole. So we're talking about the sheikh as a mentor. Okay, the sheikh is, you see, now what you have is with some of these kulliyat, these universities, and I'm intentionally using a slang word for them in Arabic. These kulliyat, the point of them now is you have the mudarris. The mudarris is just a lesson giver. He's not a mentor. He comes in, you're there from 9 a.m. to 9:55. Okay, now get out of here. I have 4 muffins and 2 cups of coffee I need to drink between now and 12, and I need you to not be here because I need to focus on that. So there's no mentoring. When you're around an actual sheikh that is a muallim, he's listening and he's correcting like things that are, say, like your etiquettes and your manners. Don't sit like that. Sit like this. Make sure to do this. You know, it'd be better if you did this. You know what would be good if you said and if you did this. He corrects misunderstandings. Well, no, actually, that's a misunderstanding because you misunderstand. Sometimes you'll come to the sheikh and say, oh, well, sheikh, I've got this guy. The sheikh's like, well, no. That's a misunderstanding that you've got from this point. So the conclusion's wrong because the premise is wrong. So you have to say, okay, I've got to literally cut. I have to give myself a mental lobotomy. This part doesn't belong here. And bring this back in, the mentoring. But that doesn't happen when you're in these Islamic universities, because they're looking at, has he rehearsed the literature on the papers? Yes, he has. Has he completed the documentation? Yes, he has. Now that he's finished the documentation on the papers, has he vomited it back out onto the page? Yes, he has. Fantastic. Well, here are your papers, and take it away. So you'll have a man that finishes at an Islamic university or what have you. He'll then come out, give a fatwa, in quotes, give a fatwa, and actually violate ijma with that first. Like, no, that issue's already been settled. But because he doesn't study these matters, he doesn't study the methodologies. Then when people say, it's this, then he says, that's wrong. That's what's wrong with the ummah today. They don't respect the ulama. So now he's arrogant as well. So he won't research either. So now you can't control the situation, because he's like, I've been to university. No. Going to the kuliya, because kuliya means bits of everything. That's why I call it that. It's your bits of everything. You know how you have a salad plate and you've got your hors d'oeuvres, and I'll have some of that. I'll have a Triscuit here. I'll have an egg ball. I'll have an onion here. That's what it is. It's bits of everything. It's your kuliyat, your umumiyat, your generalities. Well, that's fine if you're trying to make a pizza, but not if you're trying to make a complete human being. So you need, the sheikh is the sheikh and he's the muallim. The sheikh because he's the mentor, he's the old man. And he's the muallim because he is the teacher. You need both mentoring and teaching. That makes a solid human being. It's so interesting that a lot of the maniacs and sociopaths that we have in our ummah, they didn't have sheikhs. They had university professors, but didn't have sheikhs. So-and-so was a straight A student. I'm sure he was. And I'm sure all the other killers were also university graduates as well. They should be, because they raise sociopaths. That's what they're there for. But there's no way you get somebody who had a sheikh as a mentor, who worked on him, and then he went and killed 43 people. What, he never had a discussion with a sheikh about jihad? Never had a discussion with a sheikh about murder? You don't have those discussions with your professor. Professor, your lectures have really inspired me, and I feel that I now must strike out at... You don't say that to your professor. Your professor is a bottle of whiskey, and you are a receptacle that he pours it into. And I'm saying it just like that, because that's exactly what it is. You are imbibing his liquor, which in this case is mental or spiritual. The sheikh doesn't make you a clone of him. He teaches you what you need to learn, and then brings out the best in who you are. And that's why one of us, we went to class with one of our teachers, and he said, I want to learn everything you know. And the sheikh said, that won't do you any good if I don't teach you everything you know. Because the point is for you not to become a clone. I can't teach you everything you know. I can teach you what I know, but I can't teach you everything you know. Because by you learning everything you know is what? Self-realization. And by you finding out who you are and what Allah has intended for your life, now you can take the knowledge I've given you and actualize it, and you become what? A stable human being, and not a sociopath anymore. You go through the stage where you're a small child, everything's about you. Me. I want my breast milk, I want my breast milk, I want my bottle. Me. When you're a little kid, you grow up 3, 4. Me. Now it's time to learn the alphabet. You're coming out of the world of illiteracy into now you have to learn about other people. Then you get to be your 12, 13 years, you're a sociopath. Because you don't know where you belong in life, you don't know how you should be. Your parents have told you stuff, but now your teachers at school are telling you this is telling you that, these people are telling you this, your friends are telling you that. You are a sociopath waiting to happen. But then you meet the mentor who teaches you stuff. And what happens is the two hemispheres start to come together. They meet, they coalesce. You hit 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, you're stable now. Boom, you are who you are. You're not me. You can't be 5'11" 3/4. I'm 5'11" 3/4. You're however tall you are. I can't teach you to be 5'11" 3/4. I am. So you learn to be the best that you can be. So you're mentored in your learning. The reason why a lot of people can't digest the knowledge is because they don't get mentored. So because they don't get mentored, they can't digest it. So a guy's gone, it's like, I don't understand. He was a very socially awkward kid when he was living in Brighton, and now he's raped 400 women in Raqqa. And he's taken war slaves. He's done this, he's done that. Of course he would. Of course he would. Because that's the place where he acts out his sociopathy. Because he didn't have any mentoring. You read all these cases about where was his dad? Where was his uncle? Where was his so-and-so? So-and-so who completed his university. Yeah, that's the most important part of his life, isn't it? We always pushed him in school. I'm sure you did. So he'd be a weirdo like you. I don't want people to think I'm knocking education. I'm knocking the educational establishment, which creates sociopaths. Learning and education, it's two different things. Educational establishment is not there to help you learn. They're not there to mentor you. They can't make you better people. Here's raw data. I went to university and took in raw data. That's what I did. I love that type of stuff. You can just open me like a garbage disposal and just pour in just raw data. But you can't do anything with raw data if you don't have a mentor. Because you've just got a whole bunch of information. If I just came into these durus and told you, did you know that 85% of the Earth's core is iron? And that 10 of it is silicone for sure? And the other 5 we're not sure about. And then walked out. You wouldn't know what to do with yourself. Why? And then the next week, if you're crazy enough to come, if you're insane enough to come, you know what? Let's see what this guy's going to say this time. I walk in and say, did you know the Earth's atmospheric content of oxygen was 20% or more, and now it's 2%? That means the greenhouse gases that have escaped and made our planet much more arid than what it is have now transformed our world in ways that we can never fully grasp. Get up, walk out. You might come just for the macabre aspect of seeing somebody deconstruct mentally. But you're not coming to actually learn anything. You're just watching someone unravel mentally. You can see me talking to myself on the street if you want to do that. But that's not going to give you information. The fact that there's the revealed law, my life experiences, all these other things, and then I can take it and put it in a contiguous whole. And then say, now here is this piece of information. All of it's now related in its constituent parts. You're like, I see how that now makes something. I can see that. And then what does that do? I'm always talking about, go check out this book or whatever else. So it's spurring you to do other things. But I don't just tell people, yeah, go kill. Go do this, go do this. No, my job is to mentor slaves of Allah. That is the true essence of what the mu'allim, that's what he does. And that's what Shaikh Umar had, is he had the mu'allim. A lot of the guys that would later come to know him in the US, they didn't have the mu'allim. They were looking for a professor. What should I do? What should I do? What should my major be? I've changed my major 11 times. What should it be? Should it be media and accounting or business studies? What should it be? Yes, go kill. Yes, thank you. You're looking to be told something. You're not looking to do something with your life. You're just looking to be told, what should I do? What should I do? If your parents get in your way, kill them. Yes, master. Well, subhanAllah, not even samurais do that, or ninjas. You have to have a basics to things. So I apologize if it was long, but this issue of the sheikh as the mentor, I mean, that's why sheikh means old man is the mentor. Everybody listens to the old man. Little kids love the old man because of his stories. Teenagers and stuff love him because everyone's afraid of him. Why is everyone afraid of the sheikh? So the sheikh is like the young guy that's around the sheikh is like, my parents are afraid of the sheikh. I'm going to sit with the sheikh. Why do my parents reverence the sheikh? Why? Let me sit with the sheikh. The older people reverence the sheikh because he's a tie to the past. And the people the same age as the sheikh reverence the sheikh because of his life experience. And the teenagers and others reverence the sheikh because he seemingly has quick answers to everything in life, as if he's somehow been here before. Because when they're young, they haven't yet put together the fact that the sheikh was once your age. He just seems like this jukebox of just ilm, where he's just got ideas. Sheikh, I have this problem with, well, you could do this. That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? My parents don't understand anything about kids. not realizing the Shaykh has been there. Grandchildren love him because he's just easy to get along with and they can play and do whatever. He's all those things. The Shaykh is all those things. And so if you're looking to be a teacher, what have you, you have to be all those things. If you're looking for someone as a teacher, it's like, yeah, that's what you want to find. Is someone who's all those things. If you're looking for a professor because I need these papers, okay, that's fine. I need to get a paper. I need to get a CELTA. I need to get my IELTS. Okay, that's fine. But understand he's not going to be your mentor. So if he stiff arms you, like a cornerback or something like that, he's not meant to be your mentor. You're feeling, I feel sunken and downcast because I asked my professor about a life issue I was struggling with and he looked at me blankly. I would too if I was your professor. I'm not your friend. I'm here to get through this 400-page material in a period of time between here and here, and I have to also make sure I go to the bathroom twice between now and 12:30 to get through these cups of coffee and muffins I had on the drive over here. That's it. That's what I'm here to do. So understand that. Is there another question? Final question before we close? No? Okay. So we'll close from here, and inshallah we'll return to our scheduled classes, inshallah, next week from the signs of the end of time. But understand this is a sign of the end of time because knowledge being taken away, about the scholars being taken away, because this is definitely a scholar. Whether you agree or disagree with all what he said, like I said, we follow the muraja', but we also look at the footprint that other people who were not muraja', sheikhs and other alims have left. So we understand this is one of the signs. So we say, Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika واشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك انه غفور رحيم الحمد الراحمين ولا اله الا الله. السلام عليكم.